Alright guys, just making a very quick video for today, unscripted discussion about a unusual leveling build option for priests. So I think in this video what I'll do is I'll highlight it a little bit, highlight what this build is, give a little bit of an overview, and if people show interested in this build, then I'll make a more detailed guide. So you may be in a situation where you've leveled priest before, you've done a typical kind of shadow leveling spec, you dot up and you use your wand. It might just be a little bit bored of that playstyle, and I think this is a good alternative playstyle because the build is quite strong. In my opinion, it is competitive with other builds, but although that does need a lot of testing because this is such an unusual, unheard of build that it needs for testing. But in my tests, it feels strong. It does really good damage, and basically the idea of this build is actually to make a priest that's just a little bit more tanky, better at healing, and yeah, just a stockier priest basically. I also think the playstyle is just a little bit more interesting, it's a little bit more engaging, so it's just an option for you out there guys to experiment with. The build centres around two key abilities. First one being Star Shards. Okay, so this is an exclusive Night Elf build, which makes it even more unusual because if you know your Night Elf lore, you know that Arcane and magic and stuff has been massively banned by the Night Elves, and that's why they don't move, but they come to Teldrassil and stop using magic because they believe it's too dangerous. And here we have a priest build which is basically doing arcane damage, but I think the way it's winged in is because it's all to do with, I think it's less to do with magic, it's more to do with Elune, the kind of moon god person, deity thing, because you've also got Elune's Grace spell which kind of ties into this, so you basically become more of a balanced druid. So you've got Star Shards. What is the issue with Star Shards? So the first issue is it's a channeled spell, which means that the cast time will be, well, you will lose damage because you're being whacked in the face, but luckily we have a counter for that. Let's kind of talk about Star Shards briefly. Star Shards just happens to be a very mana efficient DPS spell. So it's channeled for 6 seconds, which means for 1 second of that cast you get maximum mana regeneration because you've hit the 5 second rule. So it just feels, it actually is one of the most mana efficient spells in the game if you're just hard casting the hell out of spells. You have absolutely no problems regenerating your mana just spam casting Star Shards really, because you'll have Spirit Tap. So, which brings me on to my first point. Let's talk about the build. Obviously the first talents that you need to get is Spirit Tap. It's pretty much an essential leveling talent for the priest that you just need, and there's no debate about it. And the next talent you want is Martyrdom. So obviously the issue with Star Shards is you can lose damage when you've been whacked in the face and your casting is interrupted. But Martyrdom fixes that, so let me read it out very briefly. So, Martyrdom gives you a 100% chance to gain a focus casting effect that lasts for 6 seconds after being the victim of a melee or ranged critical strike, which just so happens to be the exact duration of Star Shards, right? The focus casting effect prevents you from losing cast time when taking damage and increases resistance to interrupts by 20%. So, you may be reading that thinking, well, there's no guarantee for you to get a critical strike all the time, but there actually is, and it's just called making a sit macro. So, there is a debate in the community at the moment whether this trick is going to work on the live servers, but I don't know, it's probably, end of the day, it's a bit hit and miss whether that's going to be a thing or not. But basically what you need to do is make a sit macro, because when you sit down, you have a 100% chance to be critically hit, right? So we're going to exploit that fact, and that's basically the premise of this build. We're 4 minutes in, I'm only just about to show you the build, so I apologise for waffling on a bit. So what you want to do is probably open with Holy Fire. I have talents. People in the community have talked about this build. There's a small community of people who do talk about this build, and there's a guy who makes posts, and he has a few different variations of how he likes to build. I personally like to build into increased Holy Fire damage and reduced cast time of Holy Fire, because I just like to use Holy Fire in my opener because it's probably one of the highest damaging cast abilities. So I like to open with Holy Fire, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of a global cooldown, a bit like hunters do. I'm going to cast Holy Fire, and then I'm going to cast my Shadow Ward Pain. We still use Shadow Ward Pain, and then while I'm waiting for the global for Shadow Ward Pain to come back, I am just going to strafe a little bit, just to get a little bit more distance on my target so I can get a full Star Shards on before the target gets to me. So, because I'm recording this, I might have messed up a little bit, but I'm going to do a Holy Fire, and then I'm going to start strafing as soon as it comes off, and then I'm going to go Star Shards. You might get one full Star Shards in, you just let it cast out, and then you sit down, you get the Martyrdom effective, and you carry on. And then you might, if the target isn't dead by now, like this, you just finish off with the wand very briefly. And these mobs that I'm taking down now are kind of like half elites. They actually, well, they're a level 60 mob, and I'm at level 60, so these mobs are a little bit more difficult than the mobs that you probably be going against in well, just in the leveling process. So I'll go through it one more time, just to show you what it does. Is that guy going to steal my tag? Yeah, he's going to steal my tag. By the way, this guys, this is a retro WoW server. It's just a great server if you want to just like test out builds and classes and get to know the game a little bit better. So, and then Star Shards, and then sit. What you want to do is time it with the attacks of the enemy, and there you go. Like, that's probably going to die. So it's it's an interesting alternative build. You don't get massively mana drained at all, as you can see. I'm pretty fine for mana. It's probably a little bit more mana demanding than a typical build, but I think you're going to survive. It's going to be fine. It's just it's just an alternative build for you guys to try out. You might find it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging, rather than the typical shadow build. One important thing to note is that obviously when you sit and take a critical hit, that critical hit is quite nasty. So when you're taking down more than one mob, it can become a little bit difficult because you will get 2 critical hits, which might mean a little bit more healing, a bit more power warding, but end of the day you should probably be using power ward when you're against 2 mobs anyway. And then you don't really need to do the sitting tactic as much. I wouldn't recommend doing a sitting tactic as much if you're taking down more than one mob. I'd recommend going power ward shield and just being tanky and getting all your self heals on. Obviously the main advantage of this build, another one, is when you're doing a typical shadow build, you build into shadow damage, but when you're doing this build, you can build into, well, just better healing and better defenses. So when you come to heal a dungeon group, for instance, you'd be better at healing a dungeon group, or just healing yourself really while you're leveling, because you've also got access to meditation talent, divine spirit. You've got access to these talents quite early in the leveling process. And it's worth experimenting with what build you want to go for. This is just a build I've gone with now, but look, there are alternatives out there that you might prefer. You might prefer going deeper into holy. You might prefer going even deeper into shadow, maybe getting more damage. It's all worth experimenting with. But anyway, I just thought I'd highlight this unusual priest build for you guys. I hope you found it interesting. Do tell me if you want to see like a proper detailed guide and more theory crafting into this build, and I'll make a bigger video for it soon. I've also got a weapon progression guide for warriors coming out tomorrow as well. But anyway, my name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.